Hey, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Mark Reynolds. I'm director of the Point Conception Institute, the research center at the Dangerman Preserve here in Santa Barbara County. It's part of the land program. And today we'll be joined by my colleagues Norah Eddy of the Oceans Program and Monty Schmitt of the Water Program. And we're going to be sharing how our work comes together to protect California's beautiful wild coast. So a little bit about the Nature Conservancy. For 75 years, the Nature Conservancy has been advancing our mission to protect the lands and waters on which all life depends all over the world. Our science-based and collaborative strategies have positioned the Nature Conservancy as the global leader in conservation. We're active in 81 countries and territories, all 50 states, and we've been responsible for protecting over 125 million acres of land and 200 million acres of oceans. Our science shows us that if we act now, we can bend the curve and create a future in which we have a livable climate, healthy communities, and thriving nature. Our work touches down this way in California as well. So today we're going to be talking about our wild coast in California. So coastal areas have been important to humanity for millennia, really since ancient times. The first map of the world shows the known terrestrial environment surrounded by an ocean. It was made in 600 BC by a Greek philosopher and is bordered by a coast. So our fascination with the coast goes back a very long time. Coastal areas around the world are the longest ecotone, the boundary between two different ecoregions or ecological types, in this case, land and sea. Coastal areas are 390,000 miles of the globe. That's more than the distance to the moon and halfway back to Earth. Coastal areas, although they're very long, they're very narrow, and they cover only 5% of the surface area of the Earth. They pack a wall up in terms of biodiversity and providing climate resilience, ecosystem services, and their value to communities and economies. Over 40% of the population of the world lives at the coast. Now, coasts have been also fragmented and interrupted by human activities. And a recent analysis shows that only 15% of the coastal areas on the planet remain intact. They are threatened on land and on sea by a number of threats: sea level rise, climate change, habitat fragmentation. But coasts are nevertheless very, very important ecologically. In California, our coasts include river mouths, sandy beaches, and rocky shores. And this encompasses 1,000 miles of the California coastline. And the Nature Conservancy's work really spans this vast stretch of Pacific coastal area, from our work in Northern California in redwood type forests and coastal areas of the 10-mile river, through the Bay Area and emerging work at Point Reyes, down through the rugged Central Coast, all the way to the Mexican border, including some of our project areas in Santa Barbara, the Dangerman Preserve, and the Santa Clara River. So these coastal areas also hold the secrets and the answers for using nature-based solutions, for getting nature to work for us as we combat the twin crises of biodiversity decline and of climate change. Coasts can be natural and teeming with wildlife, such as this amazing assemblage of wintering shorebirds on the Southern California coast, or they can be urbanized and dominated by human activities. The coast of California spans both of these extremes. Now, Wild Coast, in holding these keys to nature-based solutions and ways that we can get nature to work for us, is really special. And I think we all know when we are in a wild coast by the experience that we have, the sound of the crashing breakers, the salt spray smell. But other ways that you can know you're in a wild coastal area are when you might have an experience where you're entering the food chain. So these are bear tracks here at the Dangerman Preserve. And so this is certainly an indicator that you're in a wild coastal place. Now, our scientists sought to provide more of a set of metrics and definition around what is wild coast. And we did a statewide analysis of what makes a wild coast wild. And we found four parameters that are paramount for defining and determining coastal wildness. Those parameters are whether it's physically intact, whether it's ecologically intact and connected, whether it has a diverse amount of native habitats and biodiversity, and whether it has a light or limited human footprint. By these criteria, we were surprised to find that 35% of California's coastline retains these wild characteristics. It's amazing, the most populous state in the country, and we have 35% of our wild coast remaining. Yet only 9% of this is protected on land and sea, so falls far short of a 30% goal that we have for most major habitat types. So wild coastal areas are a place of additional focus and ways that we can think about our protection work and the kinds of restoration work that we need to recover all of these wild elements in wild coastal areas. It's also a place where we can focus our work on keystone species and species that are going to do the most work for us in terms of ecology. And today you'll be hearing about some of these keystone species, the ways we're working on kelp forest and on salmon recovery and on wildlife to retain California's wild coast. So I'd like to introduce Norah Eddy, who's going to talk about kelp. Norah Eddy is the Associate Director of our Oceans Program.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nora. Kelp forests form a thin ribbon of habitat that hugs our coast from Mexico all the way up to our border with Oregon and supports a tremendous amount of biodiversity and productivity along the way. Kelp have been a huge part of California human experience since time immemorial and have been used by California's indigenous peoples for everything from food to medicines and crafts and household items. There's even a theory of human migration that suggests that early people traveled from Asia all the way down through the Americas along what was known as the Kelp Highway, following the rich resources that kelp provided. Kelp forests are these incredibly dramatic three-dimensional habitats that stretch from the seafloor all the way up to the ocean surface. And what you often see from shore when you're standing on your favorite beach in California, those dense floating mats just beyond the breaking waves, those are just the tops or the canopy of these vast habitats just teeming with life. And though you may not realize it, they're actually the predominant marine ecosystem along our coast, and they provide the foundation for a healthy ocean in California. These wild places provide home and nursery ground for hundreds of marine species, including some of our most iconic here in California, gray whales and sea lions, Garibaldi and abalone. Kelp forests play a role in protecting our coastlines by dampening wave energy, and they store a tremendous amount of carbon. They even provide critical habitat for juvenile salmon during their transition from freshwater to the ocean, offering shelter from predators and food as they make their journey out of coastal rivers. And at the end of its life cycle, kelp washes up on the beaches where it becomes wrack and provides food for beach invertebrates like amphipods and flies and crustaceans. And these little organisms then provide the food for shorebirds like the plovers and sandpipers, creating this vital link between marine and terrestrial ecosystems. But in 2013, kelp forests across our coast faced what is known now as the perfect storm. There were several events started by this warm water event that you may remember. It was called the Blob, and it sat off our coast for a number of years and stretched all the way from Mexico up to Alaska. And this blob was this marine heat wave, and it was this warm water, this massive warm water that weakened the kelp, which thrive in cold, nutrient-rich water, and fueled the outbreak of a marine epidemic that killed off a really important kelp forest predator, the sunflower sea star. And the result was an explosion of the kelp-eating purple urchin population. And the combined impacts of all of these events led to the decline of 96% of our kelp forests along California's north coast. Can you imagine if we lost the equivalent of our terrestrial forests north of San Francisco? 96%. That represents the loss of our foundational ecosystem along nearly 350 kilometers of coastline. And what we saw in that region was this transition from an incredibly vibrant and productive ecosystem to what you see on the right-hand side of your screen, what are known as urchin barrens, that are these huge swaths of seafloor that kind of look like big parking lots, as urchins have mowed down any kelp left in their path. In response to these large-scale declines, the Nature Conservancy's Oceans program rose to meet this challenge. And since 2019, our focus has been on developing and delivering a holistic approach to restoring abundance to these wild ocean places, with an emphasis on protecting and recovering kelp strongholds, that remaining 4% of kelp that represent our most resilient populations. These strongholds are places where kelp has survived despite all of these threats, places that are in urgent need of protection because we know in restoration, an ounce of prevention is worth more than a pound of cure. Through this holistic approach, we're not just restoring a single species, kelp, but we're resetting the entire ecosystem to bring back all of its players and restore a natural balance. Today, we're making strides in bringing back healthy kelp forests by developing novel and innovative ways to outplant kelp, actually replanting kelp forests just the way we do on land, which, just as on land, begins by collecting kelp seeds or spores from those kelp strongholds and then growing them up in a lab and outplanting them back in our restoration sites. And so, together with a diverse set of partners that includes fishermen and community members, local nonprofits, and researchers, we've developed a way of suspending the kelp we plant off the seafloor to give it a chance to reach reproductive maturity, and then it can seed the next generation once we've cleared the area below it of sea urchins. And it's working. In our restoration sites, we've seen a fourfold increase in kelp extent relative to our control sites, and we've already seen a strong occurrence of juvenile fish that are happy to have the kelp back. But as I mentioned, a holistic approach isn't just about single species recovery. So we're also focused on dedicating a significant effort to recovering the sunflower sea star, that predator that was wiped out due to a marine epidemic. This animal is a keystone species, critical for maintaining that ecosystem balance that is required for ecosystem health. The disappearance of the sunflower sea star was a major factor in kelp loss. And so for 7 years, our team has worked to develop a captive breeding program and advance science and policy initiatives to restore this species in the wild. This last 12 months has delivered tremendous breakthroughs for our work in sea star recovery. After years of tireless effort, together with our partners, a team of the world's best marine epidemiologists, this year our team announced the discovery of the causative agent of that marine epidemic that killed off this important predator. It was actually a bacterium called Vibrio pectinacida. And through this work, we've been able to identify this enemy so that we can now develop tools for fighting it off, and really gives us a chance at successfully recovering this species in the wild. Another really exciting thing that happened almost exactly a year ago today is that our team received an $18 million grant from the federal government through NOAA's Office of Habitat Conservation to establish a statewide initiative called the Pacific Coast Ocean Restoration Initiative. NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, recognized the importance of taking that holistic approach to kelp restoration. This funding and this new initiative are going to help us scale the recovery of kelp and key associated species, including the sunflower sea star, by bringing together partners across the state to advance towards a shared set of goals for the first time and objectives for habitat restoration across California. And this grant represents the largest single investment in kelp forest recovery nationwide. We take it as a clear signal from the federal government that our holistic approach to ecosystem recovery is a sound investment. Together with our partners in this initiative, we're ushering in an entirely new way for conducting marine restoration here in California, and we hope to influence how this work is being done along the entire West Coast. In the coming years, we'll work to collaborate with the state to identify priority sites for restoration and species recovery, focusing on areas where TNC is already active along California's wild coast. And in doing so, we'll connect kelp forest restoration with TNC's efforts to revive rivers, restore salmon populations, and protect coastal lands, pulling that holistic approach to ecosystem health into all the great work that we're doing across the organization. So with that, I'll turn it to Monty Schmitt, the Senior Coastal Rivers and Flows Project Director in the Water Program, who's going to share with us about work to restore healthy rivers and salmon.
Thank you so much, Nora, for that. It's a really inspiring story about our work to restore California's kelp forests. And so I am Monty Schmitt. I'm a senior project director in the water program, and I'm excited to share with everyone another hopeful, inspiring story about our work that links our ocean ecosystems with our coastal watersheds and inland communities. As Mark talked about, California's coast is a dynamic meeting point of our rivers, lands, and sea, and the interaction of these natural features fosters rich and interconnected ecosystems. Viewing them holistically reveals how much life, nature, and people depend on the health of all three. And no other animal better illustrates the power of this relationship than wild salmon. Salmon are ecological powerhouses that enrich our rivers and landscapes and coastal ecosystems as they move through the cycle of their lives. Salmon are freshwater fish who spend years at sea, where they can grow from small juveniles into mighty, powerful adults, thanks to the abundance of our coastal waters that Norah talked about. They migrate many miles back upstream to spawn, laying thousands of eggs that will become the next generation. And in their final act of life, when they die, their bodies release an abundance of marine-derived nutrients into freshwater ecosystems, fueling food webs that support streamside forests and upland ecosystems and wildlife, often hundreds of miles from the sea. The cycle continues as juvenile salmon emerge from the spawning gravels and make their way back downstream to the sea. But even in good years, less than 3% of juvenile fish will return as adults, the rest having provided an essential source of food for other fish and wildlife on land and out in the open ocean. And as essential as salmon are to our freshwater and land and ocean ecosystems, they're also inextricably part of us. For Native Americans, salmon are sacred to their cultures, histories, origin stories, and ways of life. Salmon also have economic importance to us, producing jobs through commercial and recreational fishing. And who doesn't like a nicely prepared salmon for dinner? There is something simply magical about seeing wild salmon swimming in a healthy river that enriches our lives and communities. But as many of us are aware, salmon populations have been in decline for decades, along with other freshwater fish in California. Over the last century, our rivers and streams have been depleted as water is diverted for agriculture and businesses and communities, often leaving them dry, overheated, and polluted. Many of our rivers are blocked by dams and barriers that prevent fish from returning to their natal streams. Watersheds that give life to our rivers have also been drastically altered, impacting salmon habitat. Logging and land use development for farms and communities has resulted in a loss of over 95% of our streamside forests that once provided shade and food and fallen trees that form important habitat structures like pools and spawning areas. Land use development has replaced forests and grasslands that once absorbed rainfall and recharged groundwater aquifers, which are essential for keeping streams flowing during the long, dry months of the year. Salmon entering the ocean now face harsher conditions along the coast, further reducing growth and survival. The situation has become so dire that many of our salmon and freshwater fish are threatened with extinction by the end of the year, or by the end of the century. And coho, perhaps our best example of the canary in the coal mine for the health of our coastal rivers, once numbered in the hundreds of thousands in the early 1900s. But by 1995, when they were listed as endangered, the state's entire salmon population, coho population, was estimated to be less than 5,000 fish. Given this situation and increasing pressures of climate change, growing human demand for water, and continued land use development, it's easy to feel a sense of despair. But I'm happy to say there is cause for hope, to not only halt declines and prevent extinction, but to one day restore thriving salmon populations along our wild coast. Data from the past few years has begun to show signs of a recovery. A record-breaking 30,000 plus coho salmon returned to spawn in rivers along the Mendocino coast last winter. This graph shows coho returns in the 10-mile river watershed where TNC has been working for many years, restoring habitats. For the second year in a row, these coho returns have exceeded recovery targets to reach new highs. This is exciting and encouraging for several reasons. First of which is the federal coho recovery plan expected it to take until 2120 to achieve recovery targets in the 10 miles. So we're over a century ahead of schedule. And it's not just in the 10 mile that we're seeing cause for excitement. This year, recovery targets were also hit in the neighboring Noyo River and Pudding Creek. And in the Navarro, fish have returned in numbers and in parts of the watershed not seen for decades. Something is clearly happening along the Mendocino coast that we hope is the start of a new trend toward long-term recovery of these populations. Of course, we understand that there are many factors that affect fish populations beyond our control, including naturally dry rivers, when fish face more challenging conditions. But we've been hard at work in the Navarro, 10 Mile, and elsewhere because we know that these returning fish need better habitat conditions if they are going to grow and thrive once again. The Navarro provides a good example of our holistic approach to recovering salmon populations that focuses on restoring the ecological function of our rivers from the top of the watershed down to the sea. Like many coastal watersheds, the Navarro has been impacted by historic logging practices and land use and growing demand for water, which is why it has been a perfect place to learn and develop strategies that work. And it begins with making sure the river has the water it needs to support not only fish, but also people. So we collaborate with local landowners to improve their water management practices in ways that both restore stream flow and increase the reliability of their water supplies. For example, we worked with Hush Vineyard and Blue Meadow Farms to construct ponds and tanks designed to store abundant winter water to meet their needs during the dry season. This approach reduces dependency on streams during the summer months when water is always scarce and leaving more water in stream for fish. Our work in the Navarro has also helped us to understand the essential role that groundwater plays in our coastal watersheds as the primary source of water for stream flows during the dry season. So to mitigate the impacts of well pumping and land use development, we partner with landowners to build rainwater infiltration areas that help replenish groundwater aquifers. And we're developing new groundwater modeling tools to improve our stream flow restoration efforts and to inform strategies to protect our streams from the impacts of new wells. To address the legacy of logging and land use development, we restore floodplains that provide food and shelter for fish during the high winter flows. And we construct log dam structures to form deep pools that provide refuge to juvenile fish through the hot, dry summers. Underlying all these restoration strategies are innovative science tools as well that TNC advances that provide essential information such as how much water do rivers need to support healthy river ecosystems? And our hands-on work in the Navarro and other rivers informs our policy initiatives in Sacramento to streamline restoration permitting and establish strong statewide stream flow protections. And knowing we can't achieve our ambitious goals alone, we build strategic partnerships with landowners, government agencies, and conservation organizations to accelerate and scale restoration efforts. While there's much more work to be done in the Navarro, we're confident that using this holistic approach, we can bring back our salmon populations, and not just in the Navarro, but elsewhere. Along California's wild coast, we see watersheds like the Navarro and 10 Mile, where we believe there is a potential to not only restore, but one day recover salmon populations. And we call these watersheds our salmon strongholds. These are watersheds where TNC is actively engaged already because we've identified them as ecologically important places where we can achieve lasting conservation benefits. And through our strategic partnerships with the Salmon and Steelhead Coalition in the north and the Southern Steelhead Coalition in the south, we are scaling this approach to advance recovery of salmon and steelhead along all of California's wild coast. So to use a human health analogy, it's time to get our salmon out of the ER and into the recovery room and restore the health of our watersheds and rivers so that our salmon can thrive once again. The successes we're seeing with kelp forest restoration and fish returns in the Mendocino coast and elsewhere provide evidence that we can heal our oceans, rivers, and lands so that they can function together again. And when they do, the benefits will extend beyond these ecosystems into our homes and communities because we all gain from a healthy environment. Now I'm going to turn it over to Mark to talk about the land team's work researching, restoring, and protecting our wild coast.
Thank you, Monty. The establishment of the Dangerman Preserve, 24,000 acres of coastal landscape in Southern California in 2017 as a living laboratory gave us a new appreciation for the conservation values of wild coastal areas. This represents the last remaining stretch of wild coast in all of Southern California. It's a place where abundant kelp forest drives productivity of the nearshore environment and the sandy beaches, and where TNC is actively removing dams and barriers to passage to bring back critically endangered Southern California steelhead. And we're also reintroducing black abalone to this stretch of the coast for the first time in over 30 years. And it's a place of abundant wildlife. So some measure of the wildness of this part of the coast is an anecdote from one of our ecologists, Scott Butterfield. In our early days of getting to know the preserve, Scott saw some vultures circling on this beach, and below them, a large animal was eating something. As Scott got closer, he saw something that's never been observed before. He saw a long tail swish, and it was a mountain lion eating a sea lion. Scott said he could hear his own heartbeat. So this anecdotal observation really alerted us to this is a place that's still so wild that mountain lions hunt the coast. And it piqued our curiosity for what might be the significance of this and what might this mean for conservation of coastal areas. Around the same time, we started seeing anecdotes like this reported in the scientific literature. This is a case of lions eating Cape fur seals in Namibia. This is African lions. And we started observing more of this occurring and appearing in the scientific literature. And it really led us to thinking deeply about the interchange of resources across land and sea. In a wild coastal area, resources flow between land and sea. Seals feed ocean life. They also feed the land. How do predators hunt in an intact coast like the Dangerman Preserve? And how can lessons learned from this inform our strategies for carnivore and predator conservation on land and connectivity? Working with teams from UCSB and National Geographic, we began deploying a network of wildlife cameras along the coast of the Dangerman Preserve to find answers. Now, wildlife cameras immediately give exciting insights like observations of bears hunting the beaches. And they also give a lot of images, so many that they can be really overwhelming for investigators to draw conclusions from and to perform analysis. In 8 campaigns, we've collected information from 158 locations along the coast, and in a short number of years generated nearly 2 million images, far overwhelming our ability to go through them by hand. This is a common occurrence in wildlife camera studies, and we were fortunate to have AI to the rescue. So our own conservation tech team in California has invented an application called Animal. And Animal is really critical for being able to rapidly process stacks of images like this and draw important insights for conservation. So here's how Animal works. Wildlife trigger a camera response, and that image is routed through a mesh of other cameras, uploaded to a base station that further uploads those images to the cloud, where cloud-based AI tools can detect and identify the image and send an alert to users so they can analyze that imagery in real time. So this is giving us additional surveillance on the coast. So now when we have an image like this that's detected of a lion, we can immediately process what it is and where it is. So this is giving us the ability to further understand patterns of wildlife use along this stretch of the coast. So with this network of cameras, we're able to look at the number of species and the pathways and the accessibility between the land areas and the coast for these animals. Here I'm showing a bobcat, a fox, and a coyote. Now, in all of our wildlife image analysis, the superstars and the scene stealers are the coyotes. So we've observed coyotes hunting the beaches of the Dangerman Preserve and depredating cormorants, pelicans, seals, sea lions, but also ocean life. So coyotes have been observed with fish, and for the first time ever, been documented consuming coastal mollusks like chitons. Diet analysis is revealing that maritime resources can account for 20 to 50% of the diet of coastal predators. Coyotes are a big part of this surf-to-turf nutrient flow, And it's really an analog of what we know well from Alaskan bears and salmon. In impaired coastal areas, these relationships are severed and the movement of resources will be stopped with negative impacts on ecosystem health. So armed with this information and the results of these studies, we're really thinking deeply about how do we expand our approaches to connectivity. In most connectivity planning, I'm showing Santa Barbara County here, we look at core areas such as these areas in green and think about connecting the Dangerman Preserve, which is area number 4, to core areas to the inland. So we can do this through a number of ways. Analytically, this is looking at something that's called a least cost path corridor, and the green lines in the yellow boundaries there are basically a connectivity plan and design for having wildlife stay connected. Our studies are showing it's also important that wildlife be connected to the coast and along the coast. And this is really revolutionizing how we think about the function of carnivores and predators and their value to the ecosystem, coastal ecosystems, and the ways that we can enhance our approaches to wildlife connectivity to protect them. So AI-assisted camera technology is just one of many ways the Nature Conservancy is using technology to power our projects to generate the data we need to accelerate conservation actions, from wetland restoration in Ventura County to coastal woodland and prairie restoration at the Dangerman Preserve and Point Reyes to estuary work on the North Coast. All along the coast, hundreds of miles and thousands of acres of California's wild coast are being protected in this way by the Nature Conservancy before it's too late. We're really looking for ways that we can bring together the oceans, the freshwater environment, and the land to ensure California's wild coast persists. So thank you very much, and I think we are going to go to questions now. So please submit your questions in the Q&A, and I think I'll go first to Norah, and a question about how do you monitor the health of kelp forests?
That's a great question. Well, in California, we're really fortunate in that we have a couple of ways that we monitor our kelp forests. The first is through what we call subtidal monitoring, and that happens in kind of select spots or kelp forest locations across the state. And that's actually where divers are getting in the water and they're going in and kind of getting a sense of how much kelp is there and what the associated animals are that are present at any given time. But our team has also developed this really cool technology platform called kelpwatch.org that for those who are watching from home and can just jump on their computer right now and check it out, kelpwatch.org. And this product actually takes 40 years of data from the Landsat satellite, so publicly available data, and makes it really, really user-friendly and easy to kind of look statewide at changes in kelp dynamics over that entire 40-year time series. And we actually started by developing that product here in California and have scaled that out to a number of places all over the world. And so you'll see that you can kind of drop in kelp forests in Australia and kelp forests all the way up through the Pacific Northwest and in Alaska. So that's a fun and unique tool that we're able to kind of help us monitor the health of our kelp forest here in California, but also across the world.
Great, thanks, Norah. Monty, you talked a bit about the Nature Conservancy's work with partners on salmon. I'm wondering if you could, we have a question about how do we work with state and federal agencies and other partners to do our work along the coast?
It's a great question, Mark. I think each of us could talk about the importance of partnerships with state and federal agencies and local landowners and other conservation partners. Starting, I think, on the land, I think, one of the most important local partners are our local landowners. So much of the coast isn't protected. And so a lot of the lands that we're trying to restore and bring back ecological function, create wildlife corridors and other things, requires us working with local landowners in partnership. And I think it's only through that we know that we create lasting, durable results. There's changing the way you manage your water or your land use practices is a hassle or takes time and effort. And so we need those partnerships with local landowners to achieve what we want to do. Our agency partners, are often trying to do the same thing that we are, and they need help. And we bring incredible amount of resources, both science and on the ground research and on the ground restoration activities. We also help advance policies that help them to be able to permit things more effectively and efficiently. There's a benefit with to obviously our local partners as well as the agencies. And ultimately we need their support in order to do the things that we want to do. And I'll lastly mention, that we have really good partnerships with a lot of other conservation groups, because as impactful as TNC is, we know we can't do it alone, and we do need the support of other conservation groups that are doing similar work in other parts of the state, because collectively it's going to be a community effort, so to speak, in order to achieve the things that we want to do.
Yeah, thanks, Monty. I also mention, our partnerships with ranchers and farmers and fishermen. It takes all of us working together to ensure that the coast of California remains wild and that we're benefiting from all of our coastal values, including resources.
Mm.
So we have a question about abalone recovery. And Nora, do you want to start?
Sure. Yes, I'm happy to jump in there. We, as part of this big federal grant that we received last year through NOAA that I mentioned in my talk, we are, in addition to restoring kelp forests specifically and the sunflower sea star, we actually received some funding to accelerate the pace of white abalone recovery across California. And so white abalone is an endangered marine invertebrate. It's federally listed under the Endangered Species Act. And so there have been long-term efforts to recover that species through a captive breeding program. They actually went out, I think like 20 years ago, and captured as many of the last remaining white abalone they could find, brought them into Bodega Marine Lab, and created this spawning and rearing program that has grown. And now there are kind of recovery efforts across the state, these nodes where white abalone are being bred and housed. And those animals actually are now going to be outplanted across 5 sites along the California coast. And so our team is working really closely with the state and federal government and a number of, again, really amazing partners from industry and research and academia to expand that program and get more animals into the wild. So that's the white abalone. But Mark, I'll kick it back to you and you can kind of share a little bit about our work with black abalone.
Sure. It's really exciting work. At Dangerman Preserve, we've been working on black abalone recovery. So black abalone is the smallest of the abalone species. It also occurs really highest up in the intertidal, which means that you don't have to dive necessarily to see a black abalone. At a low tide, you can see them. And they were decimated along the California coast and were actually the second marine invertebrate ever listed under the Endangered Species Act. So there have been a lot of concerns about how to bring them back. The coast of the Dangerman Preserve, they disappeared really about 30 years ago. We're down to single digits in terms of occurrence. And in working with our research partners at UC Santa Cruz, we were aware of the need for some abalone rescue based on landslide in the Big Sur area a few years ago in response to atmospheric river events. And so we started collaborating with this group about whether we could be a site for placing those rescued abalone. That particular instance the abalone went somewhere else, but it alerted our agency partners that the Dangerman Preserve was very interested in being a site for abalone translocations. And it would be a secure site. So I think one of the things that we offer in partnering with agencies not only is the science and the conservation expertise, but also in our preserves, there are protected areas where we can experiment and learn ways to get better at translocations. And we were able to bring abalone back to the Dangerman coast by sourcing them from our own Santa Cruz Island Preserve. So it's a really exciting story of recovery. 200 abalone were placed on the Dangerman coast 2 years ago. They're about 85% of them have survived and they're starting to reproduce. The abalone team, in fact, is here today out on the coast looking at these animals. And it's one of the ways I think that we are effectively partnering with our agency friends on recovering really critically important species that have important roles in the ecosystem. Okay, question over to Monty. What is the effects of the removal of the dams on the Klamath River for salmon?
Great question. It's been such a great story in the news and many, many years in the making. Removing the dams on the Klamath River is kind of almost unprecedented. The impact that we're seeing and the idea that it could be done. It's really, there's so many ways in which what has happened is inspiring us to think big and really have hope, I think, for our salmon populations. Removing the dams, obviously removed a barrier for salmon to be able to move upstream. And what we have seen already with salmon returns is truly incredible. Oftentimes we think it's going to take years before fish can rediscover these places that are now accessible to them. But salmon are really incredible animals. They have evolved to seek and to find and exploit new habitat when it becomes available. And so what we are seeing is not only the return of the river, but the health of the river. We now have a river that moves through an incredible landscape and has been extremely important to Native Americans who've lived in the region and communities that have been in the region for hundreds of years. And so it's really changing the landscape in a big way. We're seeing the river coming back. There's a lot of restoration efforts that are still underway to rehabilitate the dam locations, but river habitat is very adapted to disturbance. And so, the return of willows and cottonwoods and other riverside forests, riparian forests, can come back remarkably quick, just like the salmon. And so I think in many ways, the Klamath is a story of, not only, what people can do when they hang in there for decades through some pretty tough times, tough conversations to arrive at a solution that is working for everybody, it seems. And now it's opening up opportunities for work that we're doing, that we have been doing already up in the Scott and Shasta rivers, which are tributaries to the Klamath. Now those fish that had been coming up there, they have much larger watershed to work in. Our work that we've been doing now will be feeding into the Klamath Basin, and the synergies for salmon populations are very dynamic. And so having the Klamath open is going to benefit the work we've been doing and vice versa. So it's a very exciting time.
It's just amazing that we're having some of these fish now appear in places where they haven't been for, nearly 100 years. And this relates to the next question in the queue here is, have there been any other animals besides lions on the LA coast or African lions in Namibia making adaptations in their behavior to climate change and other environmental pressures? And I think there are, and I think one way to kind of think about answering this question, though, is how resilient nature is, and how when we give nature a chance, it really responds. So I think of our restoration work, our work on coastal wetlands in particular, where we create habitat and nature responds. We have native birds that immediately respond to those habitat changes. We see this often, and I heard a researcher the other day talk about this as sort of nature giving you a Yelp review. So when you do habitat restoration work, the animals really tell you if it's working, and their response levels are really indicative, like a Yelp review is. And I feel like the salmon are telling us this on our stream restoration work as well. So I don't know, Norah, Monty, do you have other examples of animal responses and behavior changes that you're seeing in your work?
My mind went to the same place, Mark, just thinking about the resilience. And it was just so cool to hear Monty talking about the return of these key tree species that kind of populate this riparian zone. And it had me thinking about these sweet images that came out of some of our early kelp restoration work, where we saw these juvenile young of year rockfish, these teeny tiny little translucent fish that showed up as soon as the kelp were out there. They're just seeking that, they're seeking out that habitat. And that Yelp review comment just really struck me. It's a good reminder to all of us that, keep looking for Mother Nature's thumbs up in the work that we're doing. But yeah, it's just absolutely incredible to see how quickly Mother Nature will bounce back and how quickly these animals show up.
I'll speak to another animal that is responding to climate change, and that's people. Because a lot of the work that we do in our coastal watersheds, when we've gone through the recent droughts that we have, droughts that have completely reshaped our way of thinking about water supply and reliability and safety and security that come from that. People have seen their streams that are their water source, their drinking water, dry up, and then they are forced to truck water in and do other extreme things. And we're realizing that we need to adapt as animals, and that our safety and security rely on that. Fortunately, what we do know is that when we restore the health of our ecosystems, that we end up with more water in stream. When we restore the ability to put water in the ground, that then makes its way down into the stream, and that provides more stream flow in the dry season when a lot of people are really, their water demand is the highest. And then when people adapt by storing winter water to use that to meet their dry season needs, they're reducing their reliance on dry season water that's more vulnerable. And so I think in this way, we have these nature-based solutions. When we restore the health of our ecosystems, our fish are more resilient and our water supplies are more resilient, and so are our communities, and especially in our rural coastal watersheds.
Great. Thanks, Monty. Question about kelp for Nora. How long does it take kelp to grow from spores to a plantable stand or strand? And planting them on a rope suspended above an urchin barren is brilliant. Do you eventually move the mature strand to rocks and reefs?
Kelp are the fastest growing organism, I think, in the world. They grow extremely fast. So I think I don't know, it was something like 45 days, we went from what we call like inoculated twine or rope to having a mature kelp plant that was dropping spore packets. So super fast, like a month and a half, which is incredible. And they're big. I mean, you've seen them. They can be quite large. So super fast. So we have that working in our favor, right? We're not, it's not like planting a tree where you're waiting for many dozens of years to get a reproductively mature organism. We have very fast turnover with our kelp forests. And in terms of what we have to do with the kelps that we're outplanting, we actually take them once they've dropped their spores and kind of done their work. We actually have to remove them per our permitting with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. We actually do remove them, and it's incredible because those systems that we've built, these units that we call RKEV units, that suspend the kelp off the bottom, they're actually weighted with kettlebells. And the kelp are so strong that when we go to pull them up after they've dropped their spores, the team goes out and just actually pulls them up by hand from the kelp and pulls the kettlebell up along with them. So it's pretty incredible. Ultimately, the goal will be that what is left in their wake is the footprint of a new forest that those kelps have seeded. And so we'll see next spring if what the outcome is for this year's work. But ideally, eventually we get to a place where we can leave all of that amazing biomass in the water.
Great. So we have a question, I think for all of us, but maybe I'll go first. How can we preserve the ability of the general public to experience the wild coast without harming them? I think this is something that Monty touched on, is how important the coast is for people. And as Californians, we love our coastline. We love to, it's part of being Californian. We love to experience the coast. And yet, there are definitely places where we love it to death. And so, how do we balance this? And I guess one way is just being really thoughtful about that nature does need room to roam, and there are places where we really need uh, natural strongholds and for nature to have the ability to be wild. And that means we need to think about the amount and kind of public access. So, two examples I would present are the Dangerman Preserve and our Santa Clara River project. So, Santa Clara River, we have a very active program for providing public access to experience the project, experience our work, and experience nature. At the Dangerman Preserve, we have a program that's much more curated. We want people to experience the Dangerman Preserve, but we want it to be also done in a way that really is sensitive to the precious resources here. And so our public programming is something that is a more guided and curated experience. It's something, though, anybody can sign up to be part of. So we are, I think, throughout our work, trying to look for opportunities to bring the public in, make sure they understand the value of nature. But there is definitely a balance between how much and what kind of access. Monty, Nora, do you want to embellish on that?
I
Nora?
think that's a great response. My knee-jerk reaction to that is that in the places where we're conducting kelp restoration, there are kind of these inherent barriers of cold, freezing cold water and really rugged coastline and lots of sharks. And so there's kind of a natural built-in inhibitors for access in water anyway. But yeah, I think there's an appropriate balance to strike there. You want people to have that engagement, and for most folks, their engagement with the ocean typically ends at the beach. So, you know, having exposure to something and teaching folks to love it is certainly an important part of the work that we do.
Yeah,
So here's
I
the,
would.
go ahead,
Oh,
Monty.
I would just add, I mean, from a, to speak to rivers and salmon, I can't go without saying that the commercial salmon season has been closed for several years in a row because our salmon populations are so low that we're, to commercially fish is to further undermine already a very weakened populations of salmon. So we want people to eat salmon. We want people to be able to fish salmon. We want there to be enough salmon so that when we do, that it's sustainable. And so I think in this way, we really we focus on the need for restoration, not because we just want to put the animals back in the rivers and all the ecological benefits I talked about, but also so that people can fish for them, that there can be a fishing economy and that people can enjoy fishing and that experience of being out in streams and fishing for salmon and steelhead. These are things that bring people out into nature. And so that when people experience nature, then they want to care for it, and then they do the things that we want, which is to vote for conservation dollars that we need to be able to fund the work and to be supportive of efforts that properly manage our parks, so that our parks have enough funding to be able to protect and manage the lands in a way that allows people to be able to enjoy them sustainably.
So we have time for one last question. So what are opportunities to get involved with coastal conservation and how can people help protect our coasts? Maybe Nora, you want to go first?
Sure. The way that I kind of think about that question when we're asked is, first of all, there's opportunities to get involved directly with kelp forest restoration, even though I did just talk about sharks in cold water. However, if you are a diver or if you have kind of ocean proclivities, definitely reach out. There are opportunities to help with some urchin removals, and that's a really fun thing to do. Supporting conservation efforts through your dollar, but especially through your vote. So being really mindful of some of the great legislation here in California and nationally, and just kind of keeping your finger on the pulse of how your vote can support a lot of these initiatives in lots of different ways, whether it's through funding or permitting changes or what have you. I think just being an aware and participatory citizen is really important for this work.
Monty?
I'll add to those I would add to those and say more that, from a river and fish perspective, everybody can conserve water. The less water we use, the more water can stay in stream for nature. And so it just water conservation, no matter where you are, has an environmental benefit on many different levels. Secondly, is to be really thoughtful, especially for people who live near streams, to be mindful of non-point source pollutions, things where when we think about, water, things being dumped into drains and things like that, that water travels downstream and eventually ends up in our oceans, and our oceans also suffer, often being polluted from our streams, especially in the early rains. And then, lastly, if for folks who live especially near streams and more rural places, we oftentimes, when we have storms and how we manage our land, we're just usually trying to get rainwater off of our property as quickly into a culvert or down a drain as possible. But if we stop and think about how can we instead have that water infiltrate into the ground is the biggest reservoir, that we've got, really, and it has so much value in terms of storing water for dry seasons, and it also has so much benefit for our streams. So thinking about, how to manage your property, large and small, to retain that water, to increase infiltration. So I'd say those be the things everybody can do.
Well, that's great. I also think become an ambassador for your favorite part of the coast where you live or where you like to travel to, and be an advocate for it. And the more you can get involved locally, also stay involved with the Nature Conservancy. We have projects and preserves all over the California coast and all over the state. And there are a lot of opportunities to get involved with us and with our work, as Nora mentioned. It's getting time for us to wrap, but we've tried to give you a little taste and experience of being at the coast and all of its conservation values, and the way the Nature Conservancy works on ocean, water, and land to bring together all of the elements that we need for a healthy coast, and how science and action can lead to hope. And there's some really hopeful stories on kelp and salmon. So thanks to my colleagues, Norah and Monty, and thanks to you all for joining us today and for all of your insightful questions. There were many questions we weren't able to get to, but the recording of this will be available after the fact. And thank you all for your support of the Nature Conservancy and for the great wild coasts of California.